What shall we talk about tonight? Maybe some questions, maybe some savagery, maybe some different books. We have so many things that we can cover. I believe I have also the ideal of human unity that we can talk about. It is a pressing time for human unity. There isn't much out there, and there isn't much in Oregon either. It must come, and we must all aspire for it. Nothing can be truly done without human unity. Now I'm working with the architects on the Garden of Life. And they are young people in their early 20s, mid-20s. The problem is they don't know anything about mother. They don't know anything about flowers. They draw plants. And they're good at drawing plants. But when it gets on the ground and you are looking at Mother Earth, Mother India, it becomes a different thing altogether. What does Mother India want? And what does the Divine Mother want in that garden of life? Mother said to me, I have chosen all the flowers. So she chose them all for each garden. There are so many stones in these gardens of the Matrimondia. We need more flowers. We need the flowers that are representative for each garden, and that will be a challenge. We do have some good people coming, some good people working together. They want to make changes to the Garden of Bliss that would make it more beautiful. There's the Garden of Life and the Garden of Power, which are sort of opposite each other. But no one ever talked about the Garden of Light. And that should be the next garden. Existence, consciousness, bliss, light, life, power. They forgot about life. Well, they didn't forget about it. They didn't want to do it. Too much of a challenge. And it's a huge garden. So I'm writing something every week in the news and notes, inviting Orvillians to come and work with us to realize these gardens. I don't know how many years I have left now. And there are 8 gardens still to be completed of the 12. There are only 4 done so far. Now we're working on the Garden of Life. Afterwards, we'll work on the Garden of Power. But it is not the kind of power that we usually associate with things. It's not this kind of power. Mother said the flower for that garden is aesthetic power. Very different kind of power. The power of beauty and aesthetics. We have to open ourselves in a collective harmony to allow these gardens to descend onto the earth. Can't be done with the mind. Can't be done with the vital. Can't be done with any parts except our physical hands. Mother says, work is the body's best prayer to the divine. Work. Some of you already know that. we began a little early, and I don't want you to miss this letter, so I'm going to read it again. Namaste, Narad. I wanted to ask you about a dream I had at 7:30 p.m. IST on Sunday, since you figured in it. You and Sri Aurobindo were standing next to each other in the dream, and I was kissing the dust underneath Sri Aurobindo's footwear. He gently kneeled down to me, smiling at me, and asked me to show him my left palm so he could read it, while holding my left hand in his hand and smiling broadly. Sri Aurobindo remarked that there were certain difficulties in my nature and future life, and that I should take care of these perversions in me. He also remarked something about white bread not being good as he smiled at me, kneeling with my hands in his. What should I make of my dream? Is it a real experience? I ask you, since you have had many experiences with Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. I wrote him back that it was a genuine dream. Not every single thing has to be exact, but the dream itself is what we call a dream experience. It's not actually a dream. I remember once my first wife, Annie, had a dream where I was climbing up the walls of St. Paul's School, very, very high, and they were afraid I was going to fall. And I said, but I see a golden tree in the sky, and I have to bring a branch down for Mother. And I brought it down. And I was recounting this story to Vladimir, who is a friend of mine. And as I finished telling the story, he quotes a line from Savitri: "A branch of heaven transplant to mortal soul." So beautiful. So we had a question about flowers and whether we should pluck flowers and whether we can offer old flowers to the divine. And so that was answered yes on both cases. But the divine would be happier, I think, with fresh flowers. Now, we should think about arranging flowers. You know, I think it was Grace Kelly, the famous actress. She said that arranging the bowl of peonies in the morning was a prayer for her. So we have the Japanese ikebana. We have so many different styles of flower arranging. We should all practice this. Even weeds can be beautiful. Mother has named 2 grasses. One grass she's named humility, very delicate grass, and another one she's named repentance. Interesting, grasses. You had a question.
Yes. This is regarding the dream. Does it mean all the dreams where Mother and Sri Aurobindo involved is experience? Is that true?
If it moved you here, it generally would be a dream experience. But we also have to be very careful that there are forces out there who would imitate Sri Aurobindo. And I think I've told you that story of Nalini previously. Did all of you know that story of Nalini? No?
No, I don't know.
No? Okay, then I'll tell that story. Because it's a very important story. It's a real life story, not a dream. It was late at night, and Nalini, who was the greatest disciple of Sri Aurobindo and Mother, went out of his room, which is in the back by the meditation room, where the managing trustee is now, and he went to the samadhi to offer his pranams to Sri Aurobindo before he went to sleep. He gets to the samadhi, and there's Sri Aurobindo, golden, pure golden, and so beautiful. And Nalini is about to bow down and touch his feet when he sees that the feet are cloven like the devil. He said, had I touched them, I would have been destroyed. But see, he was a great yogi, and he could tell very quickly. But we can always tell also. And I want to share with you a story of a gentleman who lived many, many years in the ashram. He was from England. And he developed a technique with the pendulum. People would come to him from all over. And he would move the pendulum in front of them and tell them everything that they had to do. Sounds good. He got one man, and I can tell you that man's name was Ruud Lohman, who was previously a priest. And he wrote a book called something of the Matrimony of the Third Millennium. Maybe you've seen it. And he got so deep into the occult with his pendulum thing that he died. And some people went to Nalini, one man in particular who loved this other man very deeply, worked with him for many years in the structure of the Matrimanya, the concreting of all the pillars. And he said to Nalini, this has happened. What did Nalini answer? The psychic being is your pendulum. You can always tell truth from falsehood if you refer to your psychic being. Now, generally it's hidden. True, Sri Aurobindo says it's behind a veil. And he also says that there are two things that can tear open that veil: love and devotion. So, our first work in this yoga is to begin to open the psychic being. It may be a slow process, it may be a long process, it doesn't matter. Because that is in contact with the divine force. And you will always know, you'll never be fooled by anything if you can open the psychic being. Some other questions?
Is it the same as intuition?
No, it is not. There are many, many forms of intuition, and in this yoga, there are different levels of the mind. we live mostly in the physical mind, which is the lowest level of the mind. If we can get a little higher in this mind, we will go from higher mind to illumined mind to intuitive mind. And that's where the intuitions come from. Above the intuitive mind is the overmind. And above the overmind is the supermind. So, intuition is much higher than illumined mind or the lower stages of mind because it can grasp an area of the truth, and generally a larger area. The illumined mind catches a little bit of it, but not nearly so much as the intuitive mind. If you can go above the intuitive mind and get into the overmind, there is still duality. We still see truth and falsehood, good and bad, light and dark. And it's only when we can get into the supermind that all duality disappears and there is only oneness. Yes.
You were talking about like the psychic being knows right from wrong and truth from falsehood and everything. But many times, like in most people and in all human nature, the psychic being is very much behind. It is not in it's not in the forefront.
Yeah, I said it was behind a veil.
Right.
And I said,
So,
what opens that psychic being? Love and devotion.
So when we are doing something in our psychic, we know that probably it's wrong, but sometimes the psychic also gets mixed with the vital nature or with our mind or
No,
thought.
it never gets mixed with the vital nature or the mind. The psychic being is an entity in itself, behind the heart, in the center of the chest. Yes.
So, but when we are deciding on doing things, we are not, since the psychic is not forward, we are not living in the psychic being, so we are not making the right choices many times.
Very true.
So, but then somewhere in our heart we know it's wrong, but it does not come out as an action because there are so many veils in the human nature, and those veils tend to come forward sometimes and lead our lives.
No, the veils don't come forward. What comes forward is the vital mind,
Yeah.
the physical mind, the vital itself, the mind itself. The mind has many, many different levels, even within the physical mind. It can be the vital mind, the physical mind, and all of these things Sri Aurobindo explains so clearly. When we look at the essays on the Gita, synthesis of yoga, life divine, and the human cycle and the ideal of human unity, and basis of yoga and all of these things. He lays it out clearly to us. There's no question left anymore. Most of us do not live in our psychic being. It's not in the front. It must come to the front. And whatever it takes, we must encourage it to come to the front. Because only then will we be able to change ourselves into what Mother and Sri Aurobindo are asking us to do, to be transformed. Now, this transformation they speak of is so difficult, we can't even think about it at this point. We need to purify the mind. We need to purify the heart and the emotions. We need to purify the vital. We need to work on the physical body. Now, Sri Aurobindo never did any exercise, but he recommended exercise, and Mother created the whole physical education system in the ashram, which is carried out still today. Boxing, wrestling, tennis, basketball, so many different types of exercise Mother has given to the ladies and the men, regardless of age. Young children, older people. It's amazing how that has been laid out so perfectly. Of course, then, there are problems with the outside world that says, how can you put boys and girls together in short pants? It was never unheard of in India. I mean, people wrote letters against this. Young girls in short pants? Wow. Then people wrote letters about boys and girls being together. And Mother had to finally separate them into girls' dormitories and boys' dormitories. So we do have a huge work ahead of us. But it can be done, number one, and the help is there, number two. I practice Namajapa. Many of you know what that is? Okay. It's reciting the name of the Lord. I begin my day always remembering the Lord and thanking Him. Then breakfast, remembering Him. Then lunch. Then dinner. Then when I go to sleep. I never miss these things. But eventually what happens is that in this repetition, which Sri Aurobindo tells us invites the Lord into us, we find ourselves doing it at different moments and more moments. And some of you feel this. You may be walking someplace and suddenly you say, Lord, Mother, Sri Aurobindo. Doesn't matter what you say. Doesn't matter at all. As long as you are invoking that presence, it will come into you. And Sri Aurobindo says it will begin to lead your life as well. Some more questions? Yes.
So I have one question. Question is, I want to know that, can you please tell me, according to you, life in one word?
According to?
Life in one word.
Life?
In one word.
One word. One word for life.
Mother.
Yes. For the divine. The Lord. That's the only reason we have taken birth. We don't realize it, so many of us, because when we take birth, we fall into an ignorance. Savitri herself did. She didn't know that she was an incarnation of the Divine Mother. It's all through Savitri that we see she gradually begins to realize that she is this incarnation. She is the Divine Mother at times. And Sri Aurobindo had to go through these things. He said one time that in Savitri, he had to tear desire out by its bleeding roots and offer that place to the gods. He also had to get rid of doubt, which is a huge thing. We have so much fear and doubt in this world. When we enter the Arvind Eye Hospital, we see this thing in writing, huge sign. Ultimately, it is faith that heals.
I was reading some letters of Sri Aurobindo, and he mentions like earlier in the ashram, when there was no dispensary, there were no illnesses at all. And even if an illness would come, it would just stay for a while and then just go away. And because that time faith was so strong and everyone was so like enthusiastic to receive this new consciousness, and it was having such an effect where there was no illness at all. But then as time progressed, difficulties started coming. There was
It also has to do with mother bringing in all the children during the war. Now, there was a great doctor in charge of the dispensary, and I loved him. And his name is escaping me right now. But all the children would come, and they would say, "I'm sick. I have a bad cold." And he would say, "You want the green pill or the red pill?" And they would say, "Red pill today." And then next day it would be green pill.
Was it Nipenda?
Sugar. Huh?
Nipenda?
It was Nipendra.
Nipenda.
Yeah. Nipendra.
Nipendra.
Nipendra. And the kids would come to him, and then they'd go out healed. Because they had the red pill today. So, any other questions? We will do a little bit of silence. This huge world unintelligibly turns in the shadow of a mused inconscience. It hides a key to inner meanings missed. It locks in our hearts a voice we cannot hear. An enigmatic labor of the spirit, an exact machine of which none knows the use, an art and ingenuity without sense. This minute, elaborate, orchestrated life forever plays its motiveless symphonies. Now, this is an interesting term, this motiveless symphonies. Well, it doesn't mean a motive like I've had a motive to do something like that, or what was your motive in this? No, it has to do with the word motif. And a motif is a melody. And so we see now, forever plays its motiveless symphonies. Symphonies without a motive, without a key melody. And why does it do that? The mind learns and knows not, turning its back to truth. It studies surface laws by surface thought. Life's steps surveys, and nature's process sees. Not seeing for what she acts or why we live. Now, in the 1800s and the 1900s, there were so many nihilists. We're aware of them. I don't mean Freud or Jung or these people, but there were people like Sartre and others who would say, this world is nothing. Let's just get out of it. Let's just take a pill and go. Or, like the Buddhists, they would say, this world is an illusion. Why should we stay here? Let us concentrate make our connection with the divine, and disappear into the divine. There is nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong at all, if that's what you want for your soul. What Sri Aurobindo did was bring something very different down. He said, no, this world has to be a life divine on earth. And so we don't escape into a nirvana or a heaven above, but we transform these bodies to become supramental beings. Sri Aurobindo's term, supramental. How is it done? Mother first tells us that sincerity is the first key and the most important key. If we are insincere in any part of ourselves, it won't work. We must be sincere. Now, granted, sincerity is also progressive. We can't all be sincere 100% in a moment. There are darknesses in us that have to come out. In all of us. There are karmic situations from past lives that have to be done with, overcome, transformed if possible, or put aside. Savitri has to do this. Ashwapati has to do this. Because all of us, when we take birth, we descend immediately into total ignorance and forgetfulness. What did you know when you were 2 months old? Mind wasn't there yet. The vital wasn't active. It had no desire. The body itself, hanging on to the mother, that's about it. Even the eyes are closed in the beginning. Nowadays it's changing a lot. And what's the first sound the child makes? Ah. That's about all it can do. So even speech is not there. Now, as we begin to grow and develop, we become young people, we become adolescents, we become more and more mature. If we are not concentrated on a goal, on an end goal, then we get lost in the world. And that is the situation with the billions of people in the world. All of you are here because you answered a call. You're not aware of it yet, but that call was so strong it pulled your psychic being to come to Oroville or to the ashram. From wherever in the world, doesn't matter. Some of you have come with great hardship. I remember when I came, it was a question of life or death. I was on a Japanese ship off the coast of Alaska, and we hit a typhoon. And there were redwood logs 200 feet long and that big around that I watched snap off like toothpicks into the sea until the deck was clear. Everything was gone. The captain called me up to his quarters and he said, 1 more degree and we capsize. 1 degree. My answer to him was, you can laugh a little. We can't capsize because I have to see Mother. We didn't capsize, obviously, but it was very, very close. Others have gone through all kinds of things. People have come to bring a machine part for somebody in Oroville, and they stayed the rest of their lives. Another one came because he heard that South India had interesting temples, and he arrives here. And how many people do I hear every year saying, "Where is that gold dome place, that gold circle?" That's all they're interested in. So we had to make a touring spot for people who just wanted to see the gold. Our lives are inlets of an ocean's force. Our conscious movements have sealed origins, but with those shadowy seats, no converse hold. No understanding binds our comrade parts. Our acts emerge from a crypt our minds ignore. Our deepest depths are ignorant of themselves. Even our body is a mystery shop. We know that. I interview every week a homeopath who speaks very, very cogently and very clearly about the treatment that homeopaths use on the body. They never treat an illness. They look at the entire body as one thing. And this is something very special. Now, I open this to any page. I didn't choose the page tonight. And it's coming so clearly. As our Earth's roots lurk screened below the Earth, so lie unseen our roots of mind and life. Our springs are kept close hid beneath, within. Our souls are moved by powers behind the wall. In the subterranean reaches of the spirit, it puissance act, and recks not what it means. Using unthinking monitors and scribes, it is the cause of what we think and feel. The troglodytes of the subconscious mind. Troglodyte is a cave dweller. So we have the cave dwellers of the subconscious mind. They very often come up in us in very, very dark ways. These troglodytes are very tricky. We have names for them in India: Asura, Rakshasa, Pisacha. Pisachas are little beings that like to play with us. They're not so dangerous, but they can delay us. They can mislead us. The Rakshasas are much more serious. So we have a protection against all of them. Mother's name. If anything comes to us that we do not want, we do not like, ma, and they will go. I just wrote an article because this gentleman asked me to. It's a book I'm writing on the first 12 years of the Matrimandia Gardens. And he said, "You write the story." It was 1979, 80, whatever. Right in that area, late 70s. And Oroville was in great confusion. Mother had left her body, and there were different entities wanting to control or own Oroville. I won't mention names. And one of these groups was at the Bharat Nivas beating two of my friends to death with clubs. And this girl came to the nursery in tears. She said, "Please help them." I had 15 people and there were 200 gundas there. How to help? Well, I picked up a machete and we all left the nursery. I got to the edge of the road, and I tell you, the Lord's voice came to me so powerfully, and it said, "Drop the weapon." I dropped it. And then this voice, very softly, had me begin to call Ma in the loudest voice I could. Ma! Ma! And those 200 people opened like the Red Sea, dividing. I walked right through the 200, picked up this friend of mine, put him on my shoulder, and carried him out where another man was ready to take him. All the while calling Mother's name. When I handed him over, I stopped calling her name, and a fellow threw a rock and split my head open. And they had to rush me to the hospital. I was bleeding very badly. They had to stitch me up. Never stop calling her in any danger. That's my answer. The protection will always be there, but we can't forget her even for a moment. In those moments when there was such violence, I tell you, beating people to death. And I knew both of those people very, very well. They are good people. One of them is still in Oroville. Namajapa. Sincerity, surrender. How do we surrender? How to, this is not the surrender that we generally think of in a definition in the English dictionary. It has nothing to do with that kind of surrender. It's a joyful giving of ourselves to the divine. A joyful offering of everything of ourselves. And this is what I believe I have come back for. I have come back to try and realize the remaining 8 gardens of the Matrimandir. In the years that Mother will give me, this is my work. Because it has been 40 years and nothing has been done except 3 gardens and 4 gardens have been sort of organized, but not according to the divine Adesh, where Mother tells me it must be a thing of such great beauty that when men enter, they will say, "Ah, this is it." And they will know physically and concretely the significance of each garden. In the Garden of Youth, they will know youth. Wouldn't you like to stay in the Garden of Youth for a while? In the Garden of Bliss, they will know bliss. Who would want to leave the Garden of Bliss? That force, that vibration must be imbued in each garden. And it will be. I don't know that it will be in my lifetime, probably not. I may have to come again as a little one and grow up as a gardener again. Whatever. Do we choose our parents? Anyone? You say yes. You say no. You say yes. You say yes.
Yes.
No, you don't know.
The soul decides where it wants to manifest and take birth. The soul decides.
That's what I mean.
Well, I wouldn't want to choose
So-
the parents I have now. So
You what? You wouldn't want the parents that you have now.
yeah, so
That's a very, very important statement. And I'll tell you why it is an important statement. Because the soul chose to have these parents because it had to go through something to clear out in the being. And it may be a very difficult test. I can understand your position. I had the same. I had the same. Parents can love us, no doubt. But my father worked me to the bone. My mother was emotional. She would sit in our front porch and she would cry as the funeral processions came by. And that was her pastime, I think. She would weep, constantly weeping. Oh, another one has died. And we had a cemetery just a block or two away from us. So she had the perfect place. And then, you see, my father's father died of starvation. My father vowed that his children would never have to go through that. We didn't have much, but we had food, we had a place, a beautiful house. He built the house by himself. And it was in the country. And I grew up in that atmosphere of so much beauty. I remember once taking my little brother into the woods. He was about 5 years, no, he was maybe 4 years old, maybe 5. And suddenly there's this male deer with 12 antlers comes right, and it was the rutting season. That means the season of making new young ones. And that's supposed to be the most dangerous season of all. And here's my little brother saying, "Hi, dear." Hi, dear. And I'm standing like this. Eventually he left. The deer left. And it was the most incredible experience. Most beautiful experience. I've had so many wonderful experiences with Earth and the creatures of Earth.
You can share the one with the jaguar.
Okay.
Jaguar.
A jaguar, yeah. 2 jaguars.
What is that?
A jaguar?
Jaguar.
Jaguar, yeah.
Oh. I didn't expect that.
I was I went to Mount Shasta, which is a beautiful mountain in California. And I was with a lady who wanted me to experience the I Am Society. You heard that name before? I Am? Well, it's a pretty big society, and there was this fellow who was the head guru. Well, the first night, all these ladies are in these diaphanous gowns and dancing, and I said, not for me. So I left, and I went into the forest. It was, I believe, late afternoon. I sit down on a log, and I meditate. I don't remember for how long. And I open my eyes, and there are 12 quail all around my feet, feeding on seeds. It was the most beautiful experience. But it wasn't over, because a few minutes later, this newborn fawn, little baby deer, comes up to me with a big black nose, and he wants to know who this being is. He's never seen this kind of being before, this kind of animal before. And he's looking at me, and he's coming closer and closer, and his mother comes, and she starts calling him. He doesn't want to go. He wants to find out more about this strange animal with hands and legs. And finally, she convinces him, and he goes. So I'm going through all these marvelous experiences. And I think it was about 30 meters away from me, I suddenly see these two black jaguars. And they see me. No problem at all. I said, I have mother's protection. Nothing can hurt me. And they start playing a game. There was a tree that had fallen, and it was like this. And the game they were playing is who can push the other one off. I watched them for almost an hour. And then they left. And that was it. That was my experience. So beautiful. I've had so many experiences of snakes. They would get caught in a mesh where I was trying to prevent the deer from eating plants, and I would have to cut them out of the mesh. They were non-poisonous, but they had fear, and I could smell their fear. It's not a very pleasant smell. Some of them had no fear, and there was no smell at all. Now, the key to holding a snake is never to hold a snake. Let it hold you. And so they would wrap themselves around my arm as I was cutting them free. And then I would let them go in the grass, and they would be fine. There was a hawk, a red-tailed hawk. I still have, maybe I'll find a picture of her one day. And she was starving to death. And I called my friend who lived in Atlanta, Georgia, and he photographed raptors, that is, birds of prey, living in the city. And that was his work for Discovery Channel. Well, he said, get some chicken legs, raw, and let her come and get them. Well, he didn't tell me how to do it, so I got the chicken legs, and I walked out holding the chicken leg up. And that hawk comes, and it's gone. I did it for 2 weeks, and one day she was so hungry that she came right here, because I didn't have time. Well, I wasn't conscious. I had the chicken leg in my hand this way, and she had to come through a rope in the deck. Well, no, she had to come and get it out of me and go through a rope in the deck. And she could do that. I've never seen such agility. She was just marvelous. And she didn't get the leg because I was holding it in the wrong way. And so I put it up on the deck, and she came and got it later. One day she comes, and she's sitting on the rail of the deck, and I'm only 6 feet away from her. And I say to her, may I photograph you? I get my camera out, and birds usually fly immediately. She stands there, and she poses this way and that way. And I took many photos of her. There is this connection that we can have with wild things. I think Wendell Berry, the poet, wrote The Peace of Wild Things. If you can read that poem, it's very beautiful. The Peace of Wild Things. There's just so much beauty in this world. If we can open our eyes to see it. There's beauty in each of you. So much beauty in each of you. It's pouring out. I can feel it. I feel it, as W.B. Yeats would say, in the deep heart's core. That's where we feel this oneness. It is a psychic feeling, obviously. We have to bear with that all the time. See you all next week.